More than 200 participants joining us today. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the ASEM Day virtual celebration. The 1st of March is the Asia-Europe meeting, or ASEM Day. This year, ASEM Day is especially important as we are also celebrating the 25th anniversary of this informal forum for dialogue and cooperation between Asia and Europe. On this landmark occasion, the European Union (EU), together with the Center for Fine Art Brussels (BOZAR) and the Asia-Europe Foundation (ASEF), have prepared a special presentation for ASEM and for all of you. Today, during the first part, we will launch the digital exhibition, A Passage to Asia, 25 Centuries of Exchange between Asia and Europe. In the second part, you are invited to participate in a dialogue forum on the state of play, perspectives and new forms of cooperation between Asian and European museums. We will be joined live by renowned museum representatives and curators from Asia and Europe. To commence this celebration, let's hear from the representatives of our co-organizing partners. I'd first like to welcome Ms. Hilde Hardeman, Director General from Service for Foreign Policy Instruments, FPI. Ms. Hardeman, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, dear friends, I'm delighted to let you come into this passage to Asia, marking 25 years of Asia-Europe meetings. One generation ago, Asians and Europeans decided to step up their cooperation. This has paid off. We can be proud how we have come together for a more peaceful and sustainable world through dialogue, trust, and connectedness. Celebrating the 25th anniversary of ASEM is a good moment to look back at the historical ties between our societies, our cultures, our economies. For 25 centuries, we have exchanged goods, ideas, philosophies. Culture has been an ideal vehicle for exchange. Over the past months, the way we create and especially live culture in Europe, Asia, and across the world has been severely impacted by the pandemic that affects us all. But our cultural exchanges have not fallen silent. Culture has kept the conversation going between our continents. Now, more than ever, culture can help us to get through this difficult stretch towards brighter perspectives. That is why today and throughout the year, we will bring 18 artifacts from 15 Asian countries to your home. Each piece of work allows us to dive into the diversity of cultural expressions and the rich cross-fertilization between European and Asian societies, economies, cultures. These pieces of art remind us how precious our mobility and human contacts really are. Let us cherish them for what they represent, for the beauty they offer, for the wisdom they hold, for the perspective they bring to each of us and to Asia-Europe relations. And now, enjoy and let yourself be enchanted.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hardeman. Then I would like to pass the floor now to Mr. Gunnar Wiegand, Managing Director from European External Action Service, EEAS. Mr. Wiegand, join us, please. Welcome.
Excellencies, dear guests, dear colleagues, dear friends, welcome to this exhibition. Welcome under these extraordinary circumstances where we have to wear these kind of masks all the time. 2021 is a special year in many respects. The consequences of this global pandemic has affected our lives and continues to affect our lives in many different and profound ways. Like all of you, I sincerely hope that during this year we will be able to return to some kind of normality and to be able to meet up in person again. For the same reason, I have to address you virtually today, to officially launch this three-dimensional digital version of the Passage to Asia exhibition, which was first held here in Brussels some 10 years ago in connection with the 8th ASEM Summit. This year is also significant for ASEM partners because we are celebrating 25 years of ASEM. This represents a milestone of Asia-Europe relations and what we have achieved together as equal partners. This is not an international organization. There is no secretariat. There is no money involved, but it involves 53 partners, and it involves so many people from our continents, which to a very large extent live on the same landmass. Over the past 25 years, ASEM has become the most comprehensive partnership between Asia and Europe, crossing hands across this landmass and across the continents. ASEM's main purpose is to provide a platform, an informal platform, to foster political dialogue, to strengthen economic cooperation, to tackle global challenges together, and to promote people-to-people links. Recent developments in the international landscape have increased the value of ASEM, have increased the value as a key building block for an open, cooperative, rules-based international system. A system with effective multilateralism where there are the same rules for everybody. ASEM has contributed to strengthen the cooperation between Europe and Asia, not only in political or commercial or social terms, but also in cultural terms. This means that we become more conscious in doing this Asia-Europe meeting in many different ways about the incredible variety, the incredible richness of the many cultural links we have, linking the lives, the minds, the history of Asians and of Europeans. The launch of the virtual exhibition today, which is entitled Passage to Asia, could therefore not be more appropriate. The artifacts in this curatorial selection succinctly speak of how natural and human it is to be curious about one another, to be always in the process of learning and of borrowing from each other. This interconnectedness and this interdependence between Asia and Europe could not be better pronounced than through this exhibition. While we await and prepare for the 13th ASEM Summit later this year in Phnom Penh, I hope that this wonderful transboundary exhibition can help us stay connected during the pandemic. I wish you all a very enjoyable digital three-dimensional voyage. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wiegand. Then I would like to give the floor now to Ambassador Mr. Toru Morikawa, Executive Director from Asia Europe Foundation, ASEF. Mr. Morikawa, please join us.
Excellencies, honorable colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Asia Europe Foundation, I have the pleasure to welcome you to the launch of the ASEM Day virtual celebration on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the Asia-Europe meeting process. Since 1996, ASEM, through its informal process based on equal partnership and mutual understanding, has been progressively facilitating multilateral cooperation and stimulating development in Asia and Europe. Today, I am joining you from Singapore, where ASEF is based. For those who do not know us, ASEF was established in 1997 by ASEM leaders in the follow-up of the very first ASEM summit. Since then, publicly funded, ASEF has been facilitating multilateral cooperation in Asia and Europe, enhancing people-to-people links through cultural exchange has always been a priority area for us. In October 2010, the 8th ASEM Summit was held in Brussels, Belgium. To commemorate this important occasion, the Center for Fine Arts, Brussels, BOZAR, organized the exhibition called A Passage to Asia, 25 Centuries of Exchange between Asia and Europe. This brilliant exhibition presented over 300 precious artifacts, which illustrated beautiful examples of cultural heritage, as well as vibrant exchanges between the two regions. Helmed by Dr. Jan van Alphen and Dr. Ken Song-kwok, this exhibition resulted in an enormous multilateral cooperation project, which brought together over 70 museums from 16 Asian ASEM countries. In today's world, such a project, in its physical form, seems an uphill task. With the pandemic, the entire world, including the cultural sector, came to a pause in this current situation as we are all navigating uncertainties. People-to-people connectivity is facing one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century. Now, more than ever, cooperation and collaboration based on mutual understanding is vital to cross over to a safer world with continued vigor to engage in people-to-people exchange. As such exchanges could face unusual ups and downs, it is critical that we make a firm commitment to support people-to-people exchange through this tough time by enabling new ways of seeing and understanding the other with a strong belief in human connections that would enrich our shared future. On this note, I'm delighted to present to you this timely presentation of A Passage to Asia exhibition through the digital medium. With technological advancements, we now have access to virtual platforms that can facilitate sustainable exchange of ideas and thought, and new connections could be shaped. This virtual sliver of the original exhibition beautifully presents the value of two-way passage resting on mutual respect and cooperation. It is my hope that this cultural presentation will offer an opportunity to celebrate our shared history as well as welcome newer prospects for future cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Morikawa. Much appreciated. I would like now to ask Mr. Paul Dujardin to join us for his contribution. He's former CEO and actual advisor from BOZAR Brussels. Mr. Dujardin, please, welcome.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, dear friends. It's an honor and a pleasure to welcome you to this Passage to Asia online exhibition and to celebrate with you the 25th anniversary of Asia-Europe meeting. A celebration of blossoming and vibrant Asia-Europe relations. As a growing multidisciplinary cultural institution in the heart of Europe, the Center for Fine Arts, BOZAR, is a driving force to strengthen the ties between Europe and other countries and to foster intercultural dialogue. The Center for Fine Arts in Brussels, in the capital of Europe, has in the past collaborated intensively with Asia through an ambitious cultural programming in a variety of disciplines: visual arts, music, literature, or cinema. Already in 1929, the Center for Fine Arts in Brussels hosted an exhibition on Japanese art. Today, I'm particularly proud to look back on the project A Passage to Asia, 25th centuries of exchange and interaction between Asia and Europe. An exhibition developed in 2010 at the occasion of the 8th Asia-Europe meeting. This exhibition was a landmark experience which once again underlined the importance of culture in implementing an inclusive process involving policy and decision makers together with civil society actors. To revive this experience through the 3D digitalization of 18 artworks of the original exhibition was an incredible, exciting project. I'm confident that it will allow you to discover or rediscover these works with wonder and very special emotion. It also resonates in a very particular way in the highly complex sanitary situation that we are facing today, as the notion of passage is strongly linked to that of mobility. This situation requires an even stronger commitment on the part of cultural institutions to strengthen and forge new links to show, now more than ever, the importance of keeping cultural exchange strong and alive. This online exhibition is a vibrant witness to these exchanges by bringing together 15 Asian partners museums. If digital projects would not replace the physical experience of art, they are nonetheless for the visitors an emotional experience in their own right and offer for our cultural institutions new ways of engaging with audiences and communities beyond borders. I wish you all a very pleasant and enjoyable visit of this exhibition, and to ASEM a happy anniversary, and may the future allow us to continue our work together to promote mutual understanding, cooperation, and connectivity between Asia and Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dujardin, for your kind words. And finally, I would like to give the floor to Her Excellency Dr. Phung Sakona. She's Minister of Culture and Fine Arts from Cambodia. Ms. Sakona, please, the floor is yours.
Excellency, artists, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Today it is my great honor and pleasure to reach all of you through online connection to deliver the opening speech for the ASEM Day virtual celebration on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of ASEM. In 2021, the Kingdom of Cambodia has the great pleasure to host the forthcoming 13th Asia-Europe Summit. As one of the official side events of the ASEM Summit, we have been kindly looking forward to hosting the ASEM Cultural Festival showcasing the artistic and cultural diversity of the countries and people of Asia and Europe. Today's celebration for the ASEM Day 2021 is indeed its considerable importance and carries an even greater significance to us all in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic sweeping in the entire world. We are celebrating ASEM Day 2021 by launching a marvelous digital exhibition entitled Passage to Asia, with images of artifacts that showcase more than 25 centuries of cultural connectivity and exchange between our peoples. We expect all the projects being exhibited, as well as the opportunities that today's event provides for us to exchange ideas with and learn from each other to enrich our understanding the similarity and diversity generated from centuries of exchange from the culture and history of the ASEM partners. It is with pleasure that I acknowledge the effort of our partners to reach this goal, manifested in significant achievement in promoting cultural exchange and mutual understanding between the two continents and fostering a dialogue on cultural value. I congratulate the governments and the people of Europe and Asia for making today's event possible. Yes, we understand that we are all connected. We are so delighted to welcome you all to this digital exhibitions and dialogue forum. Thank you all, with all my heart, for providing me the particular privilege of delivering this word today. Let me also warmly congratulate all the artists and those who have responded to our invitation to participate in this ASEM Day online cultural event that will bring Europe and Asia and the people even closer together. Let me also thank all those who made this celebration possible, and we look forward to seeing you for the ASEM Cultural Festival planned later in this year. I wish the continuing good health and harmonious relations between Europe and Asia. Thank you very much. សូមអរគុណ
Thank you from all of us, Minister Sakona. Thanks to all the speakers for their kind introduction. Maybe let's now take a closer look to the exhibition itself. The digital exhibition, A Passage to Asia, 25 Centuries of Exchange Between Asia and Europe, brings together 18 artifacts from 15 countries, highlighting 2,500 years of exchange between our two continents. It is a revisitation of the retrospective A Passage to Asia, which was organized in 2010 at BOZAR with the support of ASEF on the occasion of the 8th Asia-Europe Meeting Summit in Brussels. I hope you all enjoyed the trailer and that we all made you curious to discover more. You can view the full exhibition at passagetoasia.eu. We have shared the link for you in the chat window. And then now, let's hear from the curators of the 2010 exhibition on what went on behind the scenes in bringing together this remarkable exhibition. We would like to welcome, on one hand, Dr. Jan van Alphen, independent curator and former chairman of the scientific committee from BOZAR Brussels. And on the other hand, Dr. Kenson Kwok, his former director from Asian Civilizations Museum in Singapore. Mr. van Alphen, Mr. Kwok, please join us.
The Passage to Asia exhibition was staged to commemorate the 8th ASEM Summit in 2010 in Brussels. It was an unprecedented assemblage of about 400 precious museum objects from the 17 Asian ASEM countries at that time.
I'm sure many or most, if not all, of those exhibits that were on show had never been seen in Europe before, Jan. But then you're so familiar with collections in Asian museums that you knew exactly what you wanted and where these artifacts were.
Yes, but the challenges were immense. My colleagues at the time called it a mission impossible. And indeed, think of it, what to choose and what to request from all these different countries with their precious heritage, how to get the permissions from them, how to get all these objects safely to Brussels. It was immense.
Well, normally, as you know, for exhibitions, we only work with one or at the most a handful of lenders, but never 18. So I can imagine the difficulties you had. I was really happy to help you facilitate some of the loans from Asia. In fact, I would say the whole project was a really successful Asia-Europe partnership. And I think that partnership really was, how do I say, was underpinned, if not even, it was actually made possible by the existence of ASEMUS, the Asia-Europe Museum Network that had been set up under the auspices of ASEM.
Yes, indeed. And I recall we first met at that founding meeting of ASEMUS in Stockholm in the year 2000 with many of those directors of the museums from both continents.
Yeah, and you know, then we met, apart from Stockholm, then we met again several times after that. Once again, thanks to ASEMUS. So on those meetings, we had the opportunity to visit each other's museums and establish a good rapport that turned into a long-lasting friendship. So it made it very natural when the time came for a passage to Asia to be organized that we should be partners. Thanks to ASEMUS.
Yes, and apart from a passage to Asia, there were many other Asia-Europe projects that came out of ASEMUS, of course. I remember I worked with the anthropological museums of Hamburg and Paris and Antwerp, my museum, and Manila on a successful project to restitute digitally the cultural heritage of Aboriginal peoples in the Philippines.
Yes, there was a lot of thinking in those years, you recall, about the imbalance in Asian collections between Asia and Europe. And that particular project was obviously an attempt to redress some of that imbalance. And so in a way were the other exhibitions before a passage to Asia that took place that went from Europe to Asia. And in a few instances, there were return exhibitions sent from Asian to European museums. Most of these were short-term exhibitions lasting only a few months, but there were several instances where museums in Europe actually shared some of their Asian collections with museums in Asia on a longer-term basis. And this is quite rare and something quite exceptional. So Singapore and the Philippines, for example, worked with museums in France, Germany, and the Netherlands on these rather high-profile projects. And then, of course, there were also the many capacity building workshops that reached a wide range of museum professionals in both regions.
Right. Well, I think out of all these exchanges we had, a passage to Asia was the most comprehensive form of collaboration between those museums, the most comprehensive we ever had. It was literally a multilateral kind of exhibition. Nowadays, because of COVID, we have devised a different kind of exhibition to commemorate 10 years since a passage to Asia. And it became again a daring and complex initiative, I must say, creating an alternative exhibition based on the collections of those days, but brought in a purely digital, virtual form. It's a challenge again.
Well, it's not only a challenge, but it's also rather wonderful that technology, in this case, digitization, has allowed the public to gain access to museum collections, even when the museums themselves have had to close because of the pandemic. An added bonus, of course, is this kind of technology helps with outreach, and in particular, to reach audiences that may not have been so interested to come to museums before, so that this can only help to boost visitorship when the museums are actually able to open again.
Mm-hmm. And we need to remember, though, that amazing and as realistic as the results are, this technology is rather expensive. And that's why we could only afford to recreate only 18 of the objects that were in a passage to Asia those days. And also we need to remember that no matter how interesting the technology is, nothing can ever beat the experience of seeing the real thing in a museum. You can get a lot of information via technology, but perhaps you can only get that deep emotional and transcendent experience in the direct vicinity of an object, of a real object that has had its past, its remote past, its own life. Ideally, you should be able to almost feel and smell and taste the objects. And however, the advantage of this virtual exhibition is that thanks to this new technology, one can virtually go around the object and watch it from all sides, see it from all angles. And that's something that's not possible in museums most of the time. You can see it only frontal, but this time you can really go around it. And I think that's a wonderful experience.
So there are advantages to digitization and technology for museums, and certainly technology has enabled our lives and our institutions to carry on during these difficult times. So, I mean, after all, we're using it now to record this conversation. But however, I reckon that when we talk about building social capital, for example, nothing quite beats, and this relates to your point about seeing the actual object. Nothing quite beats physical, person-to-person contact for establishing a relationship of trust when it comes to building up social capital. And when you talk about exhibitions and about lending a precious artifact from one museum in one part of the world to another museum on the opposite side of the world, obviously trust is key. And so a passage to Asia, I feel, could never have really taken place so quickly and so successfully if we, for example, we had only known each other via this computer screen. We had a relationship of trust already, and that's why we can carry on our relationship using technology.
That's right, and I think the same would apply in general to projects like cultural capital and so on. But during these troubled times, museums are the places for people to turn to find solace and meaning, to search for the beauty, for the eternal. At a time when countries need to be working together to fight the pandemic and to fight the climate change, it is more than ever vital to strengthen the cultural exchange and the capacity building that ASEM is so well set up to do.
Jan, I couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jan van Alphen and Dr. Kenson Kwok, curators of the 2010 exhibition. Let's indeed be grateful to technology and let at the same time all together count down to discover museums life again. So let's now move on to the second part of the program. We have 4 prominent personalities from the world of museums and contemporary art centers for a discussion on the evolving forms of international cooperation between Asian and European museums. This dialogue forum will be moderated by Ambassador Leon Faber, Deputy Executive Director of the Asia-Europe Foundation, ASEF. You can participate in this discussion by sending your questions in via the Q&A box on the bottom right of your screen. Ambassador Faber, please join us. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ilse, and thank you to all participants from Asia and Europe to be part of this 1 hour-long conversation that brings indeed together 4 prominent museum representatives and curators from Asia and Europe to discuss the state of play and perspectives of the museum sector and new forms of cooperation between Asia and Europe. As we have just heard, of course, digitalization is a new way of doing this, but the physical meeting are still also necessary. So I will briefly ask the 4 speakers to present themselves, And then after that, we will have 3 questions that we will pose to them. And finally, at the end, we will also invite you to the audience to bring in questions that you can either type in, and we will try then to bring them back to our speakers. So maybe I just ask now Anselm Franke, who is the head of visual arts and film from the House of Kulturen der Welt in Berlin, to present briefly himself. Anselm, please.
It is an institution that has several departments, including music, literature, science, visual arts, and film. I have been serving as head of department there since 2012, and I have also a track record of doing projects mostly in collaboration with other curators in the region of the Far East, particularly Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and mainland China. Among them were the 2012 Taipei Biennale, as well as the 2014 Shanghai Biennale.
Thank you, Anselm. Next, I would like to ask Natasha Ginwala to present herself. Natasha, she's the artistic director of the 13th Gwangju Biennale, and also the artistic director of the Colomboscope and associate curator of the Berliner Festspiele Gropiusbau. Sorry.
Thank you so much to Asia Europe Foundation and all of the colleagues today. I've been living between Europe and South Asia for the past decade, and so my practice unfolds between these regions through major institutional projects, exhibitions, biennales, publications, but also nonprofit initiatives across the cultural sector. I've been thinking actively about collective research and artistic modes of being in the world as ways to address the limits of knowledge. And that includes imperial, colonial, environmental, and racial violence. What are the ways in which alliance building, but also criticality, can continue in ways that persist to conceive integrative modes for cultural work? As mentioned, I'm the co-artistic director of the 13th Gwangju Biennale, titled Minds Rising, Spirits Tuning. The Gwangju Biennale is the oldest biennale of contemporary art, and it actively thinks through the idea of Asia today, contemporary social debates, as well as the revolutionary spirit of uprising. And with my role at the Gropiusbau as associate curator since 2018, I've been part of a new team under the directorship of Stephanie Rosenthal, thinking what this art institution can do in its relationship to Berlin and the expanding global circle of relationalities in the 21st century. My role at Colomboscope as director is to lead this interdisciplinary arts festival in Sri Lanka, considering its post-war cultural economy. And our upcoming edition is called Language is Migrant, which has been selected as the first European Houses of Culture project led by UNIC Global. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Next, I would like to invite Zoe Gray to present herself briefly. She's the senior curator of the Contemporary Art Center on Wheels in Brussels. Please, Zoe.
So thank you very much for this invitation. I'm delighted to be here in such good company on such an auspicious occasion. A couple of words about Wheels, the Center for Contemporary Art, where I'm senior curator since 2016. We are also not a museum. We're a non-collecting, non-profit Kunsthalle with a program of temporary exhibitions, and also a residency program that has hosted over 120 artists since we opened in 2007. The dynamics of Brussels' complex, layered, fragmented, and international population inform our thinking on all levels, as does our location in Brussels, in this region of Europe, which we look at as the Eurocore, a region also shaped very much by immigration and international exchange.
Thank you, Zoe. And last but certainly not least, I would like to ask Kenny Ting to present himself. He's the director of the Asian Civilizations Museum here in Singapore. Please, Kenny.
Thank you so very much to ASEF for having me here. The Asian Civilizations Museum, or ASEF, is Singapore's National Museum of Asian Antiquities and Decorative Art. I've been the director since 2016. ACM is interested in the space of the cross-cultural. Many of our objects are hybrid in nature, and curatorially, we explore the connections between civilizations in Asia and between Asia and the rest of the world. More recently, we're also very interested in aesthetic excellence historically and today in Asia, and by extension, innovation in the space of craft, artisanship, and tradition in Asian arts. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all our speakers. Now we move on to our first question. And as has already been hinted to, that over the last decade or so, museums have, of course, been in a transition with emerging changes, both in structure, but also on the curational narratives. So that brings, and of course, the pandemic has even exacerbated this tendency. Further, we also noticed, and I think this has already been hinted to by some of the speakers, that the museums need to be places for discussion, sharing knowledge, and a continued dialogue. So my question to you all would be, what are some of the lessons that you have learned over the time, and how do you embrace this change, and how do you address that? So maybe we start now first with Zoe. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I would say that if we're looking back at the past decade, as art historians in Europe, we've been keenly aware of one of the discipline's biggest challenges as it attempts to negotiate globalization and to rethink Western claims of universality. As curators of contemporary art, we're always questioning how we can introduce new practices, but we also have to pay more attention to include other cultures, narratives, and perspectives. So I think one of the major challenges faced by WHEELS is one faced by most European cultural institutions: how to adapt former linear narratives of how our societies were built and how they continue to evolve by weaving inclusive narratives in which communities and artists who were born and nourished in other traditions can also recognize themselves. For our 10th anniversary in 2017, we questioned our own position with a project titled The Absent Museum. And this looked specifically at the museum's role in public debate, in the formation of public debate. Because although museums, especially those devoted to contemporary art, have perhaps never been as popular as in recent years, our voice still goes largely unheard in the formation of public opinion, something that becomes increasingly evident if we look at the ongoing museum closures during the COVID pandemic, while commercial spaces are allowed to reopen. For that project, we took the notion of an absent museum as a metaphor for a new type of exhibition that explored transformations in art and how multiple perceptions of shared histories can exist. In September last year, we opened the sequel to this ambitious project, a sort of in-house triennale format, I suppose, that we're developing. And the exhibition is on currently. It is titled Risquons Tout, which translates as Let's Risk Everything. And it's an exhibition of work by 38 international artists, all based in the Eurocore region, which I mentioned before, but from very diverse backgrounds. And it includes 20 new commissions and an open school discursive program. So Risquons Tout engages with the dynamics of transition, of mixing, of creolization that occur in between places such as borderlands. And in fact, Risquons Tout is the name of a hamlet located on the French-Belgian border, previously known for smuggling. The project explores the potential of risk in relation to innovation. In an era increasingly marked by digital processes, it asks how anything new or unknown can emerge when prediction algorithms protect us from confronting the unknown. The growing influence of machine intelligence is accompanied by an increasing conformity of thought. So the artists and thinkers invited for Risquons Tout challenge this by venturing into territories of the unknown, the uncharted, and the unbounded. We've been preparing the project over the past 3 years, But of course, the recent context has changed rather dramatically all our perceptions of risk as we watch daily the percentages and risks of infection in all different corners of the cities and countries we live in. The performance program that was scheduled has been largely cancelled as people are not allowed to come together in large groups. Although one new commission, a radio play by Christian Niampeter, can go ahead, although without the originally planned live audience. Fortunately, the discursive program of the Open School was able to shift online, and I think that the results were fairly positive, although that sort of physical, performative experience of being together in a place to talk is irreplaceable, even if these formats allow the exchange of ideas. And although we were obliged to rearrange our exhibition program, like all of our colleagues in this region, and we had to close for a second lockdown shortly after the exhibition opened, we were able to extend the project, and we are currently open to the public, which I have to say is a great joy. When we reopened, I had to restrain myself from going and hugging all the visitors that came in, which was a not very COVID safe thing to be doing. As for our upcoming program, while we hope to reschedule certain large monographic exhibitions that were originally planned for last year to this year and next year, we're also exploring other curatorial models. So I'm curating an exhibition titled Regenerate that will open on May 1st, important symbolic date in this part of the world, and that will feature work made very recently by artists across Belgium. For planners such as myself, I think many curators are inherent planners. The impossibility to plan and the uncertainty that this creates for institutions, but even more importantly for the artists that we work with, has been really exhausting. The constant shifting, but just the uncertainty, the impossibility of being able to maintain commitments with the people to whom we're commissioning projects is extremely challenging. So with this project, one way we're attempting to embrace this uncertainty is by programming it in waves. We're always hearing about which waves we're in, how long they're going on for. Nobody knows how big they are. To try and turn the idea of the wave into something more creative and positive. So we're curating in waves, not knowing how long each wave will last, not knowing how many artists will be involved, but as a way to at least be able to act and to begin projects. It's also an occasion to reassess local artistic practices. So I've been zigzagging across this relatively small country to delve into what is being made by the very diverse artists working here. And that feels like a real privilege and an opportunity which has been triggered by the pandemic context.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. So this was already a very comprehensive overview of what you have done and the challenges, how you have addressed them. I especially like the idea, of course, also that you mentioned the different perspectives of cultures and how we have to change that indeed, but also the absent museum. I find that is very interesting, especially we see, of course, that commercial spaces need to open, of course, as well, but we should not forget about the museums and the art scene. So I won't go into all of what you have said, but thanks very much of that. So next is I would like to ask Natasha to give us her perspective on this same question. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I've been thinking over the past year about how the museum can become a site of refuge and continue to grapple with the communal narrative threads that read against the grain of master frameworks. This is, in a sense, the time, if we do not recalibrate some of the institutional frameworks, we might be sitting with certain models that have far exceeded their urgency. Since the word diversity has been brought up in different ways, I'd like to revisit how this term diversity has been considered through the philosopher Edouard Glissant. Glissant says diversity, which is neither chaos nor sterility, means the human spirit striving for cross-cultural relationship without universalist transcendence. Diversity needs the presence of people no longer as objects to be swallowed up, but rather with the intention of creating a new relationship. Sameness requires fixed being. Diversity establishes becoming. And so this, in a sense, I feel speaks also to a lot of ways in which we are trying to work, not only myself, but also my colleagues. With the 13th Guangzhou Biennale, we have been working with 69 artists and over 30 thinkers, scientists, and literary contributors across 4 venues, including a purpose-built Biennale hall. After the appointment of my co-artistic director and myself, building a team that has been active across 7 countries, it has been an absolutely monumental undertaking, dealing with Korean bureaucracy and establishment protocols from a distance, mentoring a fairly young team of colleagues from a distance. Digital exhibition making is one thing, but we needed to spatialize our vision from a distance, and at the same time recalibrate our programming digitally in parallel. So that particular task of moving digitally and spatially in the same temporal frame has been quite challenging. We did receive 6 months of extra time due to the first postponement of the Biennale, and yet this too, was just enough for us to kind of catch on, because as Zoe has mentioned, artists' lives have been changing and artists' ways of working have been transforming while we lived through the pandemic. So a Biennale, in a sense, cannot continue without taking those aspects into consideration. Our project has been considering the nature of intelligence today. That is organic and inorganic intelligence, human and beyond human intelligence, beyond the binary framework, really thinking also of an active critique of the so-called machine brain, but rather where augmented intelligence truly braids a way of being in the world that is ecologically and socially desirable, looking at models of indigenous, matrilineal, and queer modes of life building, and ways in which justice and sovereignty can be the undercurrent to these endeavors. So this has been, the broad sort of framework of the Biennale, and luckily we were able to do major research trips with around 20 international and Korean artists before the lockdown and the slowdown of travel. And it was these research and site visits that enabled us to then deal with working in this sort of rather alienated manner. We've also been extremely critical, actually, of the way in which this digital interface sort of creates a seeming equality, and work with various scholars, and I'd maybe elaborate on that in the next question, but really what are the modes of extractivism, surveillance, and censorship that are also playing alongside this mode of technological interfaces. And that's also something that we've been thinking about in relation to, so-called AI and then various forms of human intelligence that sustain this web work. In terms of the festival in Sri Lanka, which is a non-profit model, really, it has been extremely difficult for us to keep up with the kind of forms of international engagement and practices of really building solidarity with our cultural network that lies beyond the island, because Sri Lanka has been really at the crossroads of the Indian Ocean world, and that drives a lot of the festival framework. Notions of migration, forced dispossession, and diaspora, forms of testimony during wartime. These are all aspects of our current thinking as part of the project Language is Migrant, which will hopefully take place as a festival in August this year.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Also, indeed, to go into the aspect of the diversity and how that creates. And I would just like to mention that ASEF's mission statement is diversity creates. So in that regard, I think we're online. But also thank you very much to dwell on the question of intelligence and how that works out or doesn't or does in different ways. So maybe next I would like to ask Kenny to give us his perspectives, please.
Thank you so very much, Leon. I'm going to give the perspective from the museum. The question is about change, and incidentally, actually, the Asian Civilizations Museum has been in the throes of great change since 2014. We have been renovating each and every one of our galleries since then, and 2020, unfortunately, was meant to be the completion of this huge renovation project, where we shifted from an ethnographic museum to a museum of antiquities and decorative art, focused on looking at Asia's historic role in the globe, as well as looking at Asian aesthetic excellence. I would say that we have had plans in store for change even before the pandemic hit, but the pandemic has sort of accelerated this change, and in particular made our board members and patrons also a lot more comfortable with it. The key change that we've embarked on is to explore how we can actually introduce the voices of people and artisans more strongly into the museum. And we made some small steps towards doing this before the pandemic. I was actually scolded by my board for working with some living designers and artisans in the museum as a way of extending the timeline of our collection and our scope from historical to the contemporary. But post-pandemic, this notion of actually trying to find ways to bring these living artisans and designers and bring the communities into the people has become something that is well accepted. That is something that we have to do. So I'd like to point out just one project that we recently worked on, this exhibition right here, Faith, Beauty, Love, and Hope. This exhibition took place because all of our sort of scheduled exhibitions couldn't take place because of travel restrictions. Nothing could come in and out of Singapore. And after multiple postponements of exhibitions that were due to come from abroad, we decided that we had to look within. So essentially what this exhibition is a showcase of some of our own collection, treasures from our own collection. But we decided that we had to curate this very differently. So instead of having one of our curators, create a curatorial storyline that would make sense for our pieces of our collection, what we did was to invite individuals from across the museum, everyone from the member of the security to our estates and facilities team, to the manager of the restaurant, to our volunteers and docents, to our board members, and also the curators, of course, to pick pieces from across the collection, which they felt resonated very strongly with them, and which they felt would also mean something to them in terms of what we all went through in this pandemic year. And then these pieces were put together in a show. And if you went into the exhibition, on the walls, the curatorial text is actually the personal reflections of each of these individuals as to why they picked this piece and how this piece spoke to them. We decided also to title it Faith, Beauty, Love, Hope, because we felt that these were the kinds of essences that we wished to communicate in order to acknowledge the sort of mourning and grieving everybody went through collectively, but also individually, but to also signal that we must have hope for the year ahead. This exhibition has also sort of sparked off certain experimental or radically new ways for us to work. So for example, we have a digital screen in the exhibition wherein we invite every single visitor to the exhibition to also pick a piece from the exhibition and share their own reflections or thoughts as to why or what this piece means to them. And this is reflected on the screen and the wall. We have recently worked with the elders of the various communities of faith in Singapore. These are there is an organization called the Interreligious Organization in Singapore that promotes religious harmony across 10 great faiths in Asia. And each of these elders came in, did the same thing where they picked pieces from our collection and spoke about it. And we later shared this over social media. We've also sort of managed to work together with our volunteers to create a brand new publication in Chinese inspired by faith, beauty, love, and hope of treasures from our collection. So I think that what the pandemic has done is to force us to think very, very sort of creatively about ways in which we can involve the community in actually creating exhibitions that would speak to just the issues at hand, but also to them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kenny, very much for this. And also explaining the renovation process that you have gone through, and of course on the wonderful exhibition that I had myself also the pleasure to visit. And I like very much the way that how people, every visitor can react to specific items that are there and give their impressions on that. Please, Anselm, give us your perspective as well.
Yes, thank you. I think for us, the pandemic was also giving us a chance in the institution to really sit together and reflect on what we conceive of as our task in a more concise way. Because of course we're having a sort of, you know, an institution under this title, House of World Cultures, etc., has a very clear mission already given in its name. And I thought like we were somehow departing in these discussions, I think, from the general kind of sense that there's a series of contradictions or paradoxons in this kind of perception of a common planetary now, a presence of like a shared planetary condition, even if it's a condition that is produced sort of by the double emergency of climate change and the pandemic, no? And on the other hand, like a kind of infrastructure that doesn't fully live up, or that seems completely not matching up to the challenges of this planetary entanglement. So in the sense that we, you know, in our institution, we were trying to reflect on the relationship between what are our infrastructures capable of doing and what are the challenges of this, let's call it planetary moment. So of course we are living in a time where international institutions are coming under great pressure, or have been in the past few years in particular under great pressure. So you could easily say politically there's a lot of work to be done to reimagine what is an international infrastructure in the first place. But for cultural institutions and like ours, but also of course museums, I think for us the question that sort of moved into the core of our internal reflections was really what is a common ground, and how can we contribute to think about and also implement what would form the conditions of possibility for a common planetary social imaginary. And this, of course, against the backdrop of a logic that is still very much implicit in our institutions, meaning, you know, there's no question that the legacy of centuries of colonial and imperial history still decisively shape the life worlds and speech positions of the majority of people today, and the dividing lines within and between societies were decisively produced by them in their modern and national form. No? And so this question of common ground is very much a question that concerns also the narratives, of course, of how history is told, how we produce literacy around history, and from what vantage point, both in collection-based and non-collection-based curatorial work. I think we were kind of working a lot on this notion of what are the infrastructures for what Michael Rothberg called a multi-directional memory, a memory that in its implicit and explicit mechanics does not reproduce a kind of, you know, philosophically speaking, you would say a kind of cover, a universalist cover, but a true universality. No? Like a cover would be, you have universalist concepts that in fact act as sorting mechanisms, while at the same time hiding how that is put into place, and putting a kind of material form of organization into place that contradicts what its proclamations on the verbal level produce as an aspirational horizon. So this has been sort of what we were discussing in-house, and I think we had a really intense and great time that really led us to emphasize once again that we think that the future of institutions like ours is very much in a form of transdisciplinary research and in story building, in collective story building, creating memory and future imaginaries really as a kind of infrastructure of literacy. In a way that is something very obvious to say, and I think just somehow something that we were reassured in our common discussions also with colleagues from other institutions. Very practically, we have of course also invested in online programs, and we have sort of last year we had an exhibition of this German Jewish art historian who is a sort of founding figure of iconology, Abi Warburg, and it became very clear to us when we were exhibiting this Mnemosyne Atlas, this kind of vast art historical assemblage of circling around the notion of antiquity, how it is has resurfaced in the culture of the Renaissance. It became very apparent to us that somehow the promise that was really articulated in this project, namely that of a truly transcontinental art history, that it is really something that is still lying in front of us. That in some respects even, there were more ambitious projects 120 years ago, even if often very clearly under imperial and Eurocentric frameworks, that somehow, especially, like I would say, from a perspective of someone who works a lot in contemporary art, primarily even, you could say there was great progress curatorially and institutionally in the last 20 years in sort of creating something that is really a trans-modernity, like profoundly revising what is the period, what is a history of modernity that is no longer based on a kind of monopoly over this modern history according to certain principles. But for the other side, for everything that falls through the raster of the modern, there is still a lot of work to be done. And that is something that we have sort of realized, that this transcontinental art history is really something that forces us to rethink the boundaries between disciplines of art history, religious studies, anthropology profoundly, and that's where we are going to invest our energies in the next years together with partners that we're currently recruiting.
Thank you, Anselm. I mean, you have really laid out the challenges in front of us in indeed finding this collective narrative for all of us. And I think that is, of course, something that ASEM and, of course, ASEF as well, that we try to work on as well. At the same time, you also have given me a little bit the bridge to my next question in the regarding what is the future. I mean, we realize, as you have laid down, that other colleagues as well, on the difficulties that we face in terms of digitalization, but also a new need for skills, maybe new flexibilities, new agile structures to address that. But at the same time, also of course, the lack of funding that is often accompanied, especially in more dire times like these, where the priorities are then going somewhere else. So in that regard, could I maybe all of you, even though you have already hinted to that partially, to the innovative examples of museums thriving in the digital space, how can you creatively respond to that and effectively to these different crises that people are afflicted with? So can I maybe ask this time to start with Kenny to give us your thoughts on this? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think in terms of innovation in the space of the digital, I would say that the museums in China are really far ahead. And this has been the case even before the COVID pandemic. I'm not going to point out any specific museum. I would say that most major, of course, there's the Palace Museum, but then most sort of provincial museums in China have also been on board the digital platform for quite some time. There is this platform, I don't know if people know this, but there's this platform called WeChat or Weixin in China. And it's a kind of mix of Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and also various kinds of e-commerce platforms all in one. And what most museums in China have today is an entire sort of experience end-to-end that exists on this sort of Weixin or a WeChat platform. And it consists of content that is in addition to the content that you would have physically in the galleries. It also has sort of ways for you to sort of interact in the way that you do on Facebook or on Instagram or other social media with this content. But it also has opportunities for retail. So, there are also ways in which you could buy museum merchandising on this particular platform. And this particular platform actually allows for the visitor to sort of experience the museum beyond the walls of the museum, but also experience the museum very differently inside the walls of the museum. But of course, I would have to say that I have to qualify that. I think China has benefited from a tremendous direction of investment towards museums and cultural heritage in the last few years, and that's allowed for a great degree of innovation in the space of the digital. In Singapore, at least, we have had some very, very critical investment that has also allowed us to sort of do as much as we can in the space of the digital in recent years, especially, but most notably in the space of the pandemic. So at least for us at ASEM, we've tried everything that we could do in order to keep ourselves engaged with the audiences this past year. Everything from virtual galleries through to maintaining a stronger social media presence. If there's one thing that I would say I'm very pleased with is ASEM's Instagram account at ASEM-SG, where we simply push sort of lovely images from our collection. And the Instagram account was highlighted last November by the New York Times as one of 5 sort of must follow art Instagram accounts in the world. Thank you so much.
Also to highlight the importance of the social media, which by itself would of course be a topic for a discussion and a webinar like this. But maybe I can ask Natasha to, as next, to give us your views on this aspect.
It seems that we're moving really from the social contract of the individual and the cultural institution towards a techno-social contract that needs to take account of these sort of ever widening simulated realities that we're in. So once again, this question of technological interfaces really operating from various parts of South Asia, one can say that there needs to in fact be much more work, much more legwork that one does as a cultural organizer to really create that sense of equity in terms of cultural infrastructure when it comes to this sort of work. So just to give some quick examples, this time starting with the work in Sri Lanka that I've been doing with the team there, what we realized is that the very few visits that were done by curators and museum directors and so forth to the island came to a rapid halt with the pandemic. And so we tried to do these sort of virtual studio visits for a few artists. And this was done for the Asia Pacific Triennale, which led to the selection of Sri Lankan artists within this prestigious platform. Further to that, we started a digital series called Hell Apart Together that includes video and sonic dispatches that take account of how the production process and the research process of artists can be taken forward given the extension of the festival timeline. We've also been resorting, as many colleagues have, to online radio as a way of producing this kind of satellite possibility, really, of continuing dialogue. In terms of the Guangzhou Biennale, from the very outset, in fact, before the pandemic, we had launched an editorial venture, which is an online journal called Minds Rising. So rather than producing the catalog at the very end of the Biennale, from already soon after our appointment, we were developing an editorial team that started to create a reader on feminisms of the Global South, as well as this online journal. Further to that, we also had already instituted artists who would have online commissions. So their work was meant to purely live online. So in that sense, not duplicating the efforts, but actually premiering productions by artists alongside the Biennale timeline that would live on the web and use various forms of activation, including choreography and music. The Gropius Bau as well has had the difficulty of having launched exhibitions and then having to rapidly close their doors. And so for one of the traveling exhibitions at the Gropius Bau that was guest curated called Masculinities, the idea has been quite inspiring to actually invite various artists, journalists to interpret that exhibition in the form of virtual tours. So again, the question of authorship becomes multi-directional. It is not from the singular curatorial voice at every moment or stage. Also, as part of the 13th Guangzhou Biennale, we launched the forum Rising to the Surface, Practicing Solidarity Futures, which took account of the 40th anniversary of the May 18 democratic uprising in Guangzhou, really also considering it as prismatic for various civil society movements that we are seeing today, from India to Chile to Lebanon to Sudan. And we, in fact, brought together over 15 participants, really coming again from the field of activism, human rights, journalism, and political leadership. So this has really been our way of speaking in a worldly sense, and staying away from this sort of siloed localization of discourse as Biennale directors. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha, for a very comprehensive presentation and thoughtful ideas. Maybe I give the next ask Anselm to give us your perspective.
Yeah, so very brief. I mean, one of the very sort of successful formats are currently, as you all know, probably, of course, our podcasts. No? It's been very surprising to us to, I think, also because some of them at least offer you a little relief time from screen presence. Aside from that, we were also experimenting with different forms from the kind of 3D visualization, like Passages to Asia, to online collectively curated projects, such as you'll find it on the HKW website, called CC World, a kind of format for video letters to be produced by artists, such as Hu Fang, Rabia Mroué, Rax Media Collective, and many others. This has been a kind of, I think, great experience for everybody involved. I have also sort of tried to experiment with, dealing with some of the problems of online exhibitions in a format co-developed with the agency eFlux, an exhibition that I in fact toured for 4 years, about a decade ago, called Animism, is now online as a kind of hybrid between, podcast, essay film, and guided interactive online experience. And we are just now producing the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th episodes for that. under animism.eflux.org. So that's basically from our side. I mean, we're currently focusing on very much on education and educational strategies with a large exhibition called Education Shock, looking at the revolution in education concepts and architecture in the 60s and 70s. And this meets also with great interest in its online formats. Yeah.
Thank you, Anselm. Yes, all these ideas in multi-personality and not and video letters, all these very, very interesting ideas. It's difficult to grasp everything at the same time. It's very, indeed, very rich. And but please, Zoe, give us also your perspective on this.
I mean, I think the pandemic has been, and the closures it's provoked have been very confronting for so many public institutions, because when you're deprived of your public, in addition to all the practical and financial implications, there's this kind of existential crisis provoked by not being able to fulfill your primary function. And I think, although in some ways I'm very glad that that the closures that have been enforced and were necessary in Belgium have been shorter than other countries, in some ways we haven't had this extended period of reflection possible, because it's been very much closing, reopening, shifting, re-engaging staff, putting staff on hold. So when I hear of some colleagues in other institutions who've been shut for 6 months, my heart goes out to them. And on the other hand, I think that perhaps is a useful period of clarity. I think the pandemic has revealed to me and to my colleagues at Wheels that what we thought was a very agile institution is perhaps not quite as agile as we had hoped. We're relatively small, we're a staff of 20. We kind of think of ourselves as being light on our feet. And then in some things we find we actually, we drag our feet perhaps even more slowly than some larger colleague institutions. So, and just being very frank with you, but we've embraced various digital possibilities. We just launched the Wheels mixed media page, which offers like custom-made content in what we hope is a coherent and user-friendly form. But it's taken us nearly a year to develop what is fundamentally a rather simple platform. And I think that reveals the lack of digital skills and resources within our institution. And in that, I think we're not alone. I heard of an interesting platform in Finland in which Finnish museums have tackled this like individual lack of resources by working together and pooling their resources. And they've launched digiomuseum.fi, which is an interesting model to explore. Although again, for a non-collecting institution such as Wheels, it doesn't fit so well, because the cost, both financial, but also in terms of time, of creating online content for connected to a program which changes so rapidly is not the same as when you're working with a fixed collection. But again, even things like the speed of programming, I think is something that we're rethinking in the light of the pandemic, and viewing patterns and wondering whether we go back to the typical or to the previous kind of rhythm of like exhibitions lasting 3 months and then changing, or is that something we should rethink even when travel is perhaps more feasible. I'm also reluctant to see the digital realm as like as the only way forward when physical presence is harder, and not just to maintain the kind of the aura of the artwork and this like persistent primacy of the white cube as the place of its encounter, even though it's a space I'm very fond of and still find a very important context to examine, to work with. But I think that the pandemic has revealed the extent of the digital divide, even within a country as small and seemingly homogenous as Belgium. And the challenges of access to culture with which museums have been struggling for the past 2 decades are not overcome by moving into the digital realm. There was an interesting study carried out by the University of Antwerp, which revealed that during the first lockdown, so spring 2020, 21% of the people surveyed had consumed, for want of a better word, culture online for the first time. This is a great big growth. However, demographically, they were the same people who usually visit museums. So the online programming was maintaining links to faithful followers, but was not immediately connecting with new audiences. And we see this also connected to homeschooling questions, that the access to computers and also there is still a big divide, even somewhere like Belgium, between who has digital access and who doesn't. I wanted to mention one innovative project that I heard about, which brings together the on and the offline and the museum context and the educational context in an interesting way. And that's an invitation by the Mori Art Museum in Tokyo to the Colombian artist Oscar Murillo to extend his ongoing Frequencies project via digital link-up. So to quote from the Mori Art Museum website, this is: the artist reaches out to schools to affix raw canvases onto classroom desks over a period of several months, encouraging students from age 10 to 16 to cover them freely with their own drawings and marks. As the name Frequency suggests, these canvases capture the complexity of each student's unbound forms of expression through conscious and unconscious mark making. So Murillo has been speaking with school children via Zoom calls such as this, setting up this project in their schools, and then the results will be exhibited at the Mori Art Museum together with canvases from similar projects elsewhere. So I think in some ways a very simple, I'm sure for the organizers wasn't that simple, but a simple idea that can be a very dynamic and effective way to bring an artist straight into the classroom, and then to bring that project back into a physical museum space.
Thank you very much, Zoe. We have one last question, but time is also running short, and we wanted, of course, also to have a little bit some questions from the audience. So I will limit the last question to a very brief, because we have already discussed also the different digitalization and the new trends. So give us, each of you, maybe one pertaining trend that you see over the next time in the future developing. So very briefly, so that we can then move on and have some questions from our audience. So Natasha, maybe we start with you.
I'm going to try to keep this to one point. It's actually, I wanted to say a couple of things. I'm going to try. The important thing really for museum models, that's as far as I see as a kind of semi-outsider, is decentralization and really a move towards research and lateral contextualization, so that there isn't this frozen taxonomy that remains in place, but also how museum storages are seen as units of proprietorship rather than spaces and vocabularies that need to remain in negotiation and deliberation, really between generations, between places and communities. Ariela Azulay had an important exhibition at the House of World Cultures, and she has written extensively about the notion of worldly rights against imperial rights. And this is the kind of logic perhaps that we can embrace in order to think also about the politics of restitution. Dan Hicks has written a very important book in which he talks about the restitution of knowledge. And so this again takes us away from the object towards a multilateral way in which forms of knowledge are in circulation in such a way that the museum, especially the anthropological museum, is not a space to deal with entrapment and, in a sense, necropolitics at its worst, but rather really thinking about the contingencies of our times. And lastly, to just also in terms of applying what Kwame Anthony Appiah has called an ethics of diversity. So which is once again not this notion of claiming and rather seeking to own the definition of diversity, but rather understanding that forms of difference are continually generated in the world. And therefore our work is in a sense also in form of that fluidity and continuum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Decentralization and reappropriation of, yes. Thank you very much. Zoe, please.
Okay, well, I don't have three predictions, but I have one in two terms. So there's an expression in English which is generally used to suggest efficiency, and that is making things lean and mean. as in that they're shorn of all unnecessary fat and they're acting in a way that is like ruthlessly to the point. And I think that the pandemic and its subsequent aftershocks will make museums lean, but not mean. I think a lot of things will have to be trimmed down, and that will be hard for institutions and those associated with them. Certain practices that had become the norm, traveling to attend meetings, opening conferences, will no longer be possible financially, even once borders open up. But we've also now seen how much can be done remotely. I think that the necessity of all trips will be questions, whether that's for people or for artworks. And this is good because it's also part of a wider awakening, a slow awakening about the sustainability of the art world. So I think things will become more efficient in some aspects. But on the other hand, I think that the solidarity that has emerged in these difficult times will grow. I think this sense of belonging to an international art community of enthusiasts, as Natasha said, almost moving away from the object and focusing more on the idea, the importance of exchanging knowledge and ideas. I think this will not be diminished, and in fact, quite the contrary. So I think we'll see deeper, long-lasting collaborations in the co-commissioning of works and the sharing of exhibitions that will move away from this, from the outdated but still very persistent model of simply touring exhibitions from one city or one country to another. And I think that's no bad thing.
All right, thank you very much. Anselm, please, what is your prediction?
Well, I think there's an obvious necessity for museums to find innovative ways of engaging with, investing in, dedicating themselves, opening themselves to research, and perhaps I would say to narratology in the widest sense, because what's happening really in the discipline, also in academic disciplines, for instance, of archaeology, of deep history, of history in general, is mind-blowing. I mean, every narrative, every received narrative is being rewritten currently, revised, turned upside down, etc. And we see far too little of that reflected in museums, because of course museums are, when it comes to that, slow to respond. I think I was able to gaze into the future with very ambivalent feelings yesterday afternoon when happening to stumble upon a BBC program that lasted for more than an hour, presenting Microsoft Mesh, the not virtual reality program developed by Microsoft, but mixed reality program, which is like a kind of set of glasses where rather than being transported into virtual rooms, virtual objects are placed in the actual rooms, and which will predictably change entirely how we are communicating and being with each other in both physical and virtual spaces, especially how meetings would be done, but also museum experience. I mean, you could obviously see that that is going to be something that museums will be enormously affected by. And it made me just think also with regards to the possibility and perhaps some scary and even dangerous aspects of that, museums need a narratology department.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's we're in for some major changes anyway. Kenny, what is your prediction?
I think all four of us are aligned in that I believe we don't think that this, I think we think that the era of this touring, big expensive touring exhibitions has possibly passed, at least in the next few years. And really the future of cooperation across borders, across countries, across cultures would be based on people, ideas, and knowledge. I do hope actually that the focus perhaps of these international collaborations would be on best practice with regards to how much more we can sort of reflect the voices of the community in the museum, as well as what else we can do to make the object and the collection, and this is what Natasha said, what else we can do to make the object and the collection more relevant to whether it's the issues of the day or to the communities that we serve. Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to, I'm aware that we are basically already over time, but nevertheless, we have at least one question that we have from Ms. Ingrid de Graaf. There's two questions actually. One is to all curators, so to all four of you, and then there's one particular one for Natasha. So I read them together, and then I give each of you the floor again, and then also maybe for a final remark that you may add. So questions to all curators: do you implement particular methodologies during the preparation of an exhibition or biennale? For example, the principles of theory U of change management. Is that a methodology? So that is the question to all of you. And then the particular question to Natasha about your current project, Language is Migrant. What does language stand for in the title of exhibition? So maybe we start with Anselm, and yeah.
I'm not entirely sure I was able to follow that question, but I'm just going to take what I think I grasped, which is pretty much, like, I'm only going to share sort of intuitions here. My sense is that something, like on the level of what people need to get from kind of museums as infrastructure of the commons in the future, a lot will depend on how the question of transformation, of change, is something that can be both sort of translated into an experiential level and become a kind of prism or almost crystal-like structure of sort of scientifically backed up perspectivization. So the question of change and transformation is somehow the very crux of what lies sort of at the limits of any historical narrative, no, and any sort of self-positioning within. So I tend to look at museums in a way as kind of cosmological storehouses, but cosmological transformation is always that which escapes sort of the the categories and any positivist knowledge regime. So I think that is really where I see the task for the next few years. And I think that it's really something that needs to be done in collaboration in larger infrastructures in order also for it to gain traction and momentum.
Okay, thank you very much. It was about the methodology. The question is about the methodology and the principles of theory U of change management. So maybe I admit my ignorance on this one. So maybe I can ask as next Kenny to respond if you wish, or you give us.
Sure. As the museum director, I'm not so much concerned as to what methodologies my curators use. I just ask of them two things. I require that each and every exhibition have to answer these two questions. Firstly, what is original about the thesis that you are putting across with this exhibition? And secondly, how is this relevant to today? That's all really.
That's very precise and concise. Thank you. Zoe?
I'm afraid I share your ignorance of the theory U of change management. I would say, in my current position at Wheels, we show temporary exhibitions of contemporary art, so it's all recently made, and recent obviously can stretch to being a couple of decades old, to being something that is finished literally 5 minutes before the press conference of the exhibition. Each exhibition is a proposition, it's presented as a proposition, not as a truth. and we're working almost exclusively with living artists, with people who are still in the process of developing a practice which changes, which is in very differing degrees influenced by the world around us. I would not say that we are portraying artists as seers of the future. I don't think they have a better view of what's coming than other thinkers in other disciplines, but I do think artists are often, artists and their works often function as kind of barometers of change. So I don't think we are managing change, but I think we are always dealing with change inherently in our curatorial practice and in our institutional being, let's say.
Thank you. Thank you very much also for your openness. And again, last but not least, Natasha, especially also that the other question was addressed to you. So you have basically the final words.
Thanks. So as curators, a lot of us actually come from interdisciplinary backgrounds. So we come from different fields really of practice. That's quite important. I've been studying political science, journalism before coming to the field of curating. So in a sense, we're not really using abstract theories, whether that's, of management or so forth, but we're actually engaging with thinkers of our times. And that is the way in which we formulate these propositions that anchor a certain kind of logic that is not only using the visual domain, but really also various other kinds of sensory experiences. And that's why I at least really think of the exhibition as an instrument. So it's not a purely aesthetic site, at least when it comes to projects that I'm engaged in. The question of the Columbus Folk Festival theme, Language is Migrant, the term language is migrant comes from the title of a poem manifesto written by the Chilean artist-poet Cecilia Vicuña. So the title was really a kind of a gift or a vision from her. And language in this sense exceeds linguistics and linguistic possibility to think about the narrative building, the kinds of ways in which artists mobilize chronicles and storytelling methods between this conundrum of mobility and immobility, the question of migration and displacement. That is where the bridge of language lies in relation to being witness, in relation to building testimony, in relation to chronicling from personal lived experience, but also from trauma. And this, as I said, very much relates to the Sri Lankan reality, but also speaks to the reality of our world today. So yeah, hope I've answered your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think with this, we come to the end of our talk. I would not try to, in any sense, to resume what has been said, but I would really like to thank you all for very in-depth reflections and comments on this very diversified theme, and especially I think in these times, in a changing world anyway, that has been exacerbated by the COVID, but I think it's not only the COVID pandemic that has done that. I think there's many others underlying tendencies that are there and that have, of course, a large impact on this particular sector. Again, my thanks go to the four of you. My thanks also go to, of course, our audience that has patiently listened to us. And also last but, my thanks also go to our partners, the EAS, BOZAR and FPI. And last but not least, I would also like to thank my colleagues who have assisted us to setting this up. So I really hope that in one way or another, we have had some impact and that we can share these thoughts and change and broadcast that in any way. So again, let me thank you all, our panelists, for your thoughts and participation. And of course, at the 25th anniversary of ASEM, please all of go and see the exhibition on the website as it has been distributed. So with this, I would like to give back the floor to Ilse for closing the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Faber, and thank you all panelists indeed for this very interesting dialogue forum. We're indeed celebrating today the 25th anniversary of ASEM, the informal forum for dialogue and cooperation between Asia and Europe, launching today the digital exhibition, A Passage to Asia, 25 Centuries of Exchange between Asia and Europe. I think this was it for today, for this launch. We will leave you with the trailer and the link to the ASEM Cultural Festival and to the exhibition. Please keep in mind the exhibition will be online until the end of 2021 on the ASEM Cultural Festival website. Help us spread the word, please. Promote it wherever you can. Thank you all for your attention and enjoy the exhibition. Thank you.